Katerina Jakob watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Jakob saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review for September 30th, 2021. First of all, let's check in with Rainer. This is, after all, the RSR with Rainer Shea and Chris Driscoll. How you doing, Rainer? What's up? What's new?
Oh, well, this last week I finished the animated series that I think best pertains to a lot of what we talk about as anti-imperialists. It's Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh, yeah, I've seen some of that. That's very good. It's a very good show. Even I don't really enjoy the cartoon stuff, or what do they call it? Whatever they call it, the cartoons rather than live action. But in this case, it was a very good show.
Yes. Lots of concepts. Actually, one underlying pretty simple, easy to understand concept, even easy for kids to understand, evidently. The concept that the colonial power needs to be resisted.
Yeah, and that's the start of our show, really. The first two topics, or the first two issues on our list are both concern colonialism. The first one is Vijay Prashad. He's an Indian guy, but he's gets around. I understand he lives in the United States at the moment, up there in the in western Massachusetts. But he's all over the place, and he runs a book publishing outfit in India, and he also runs a nonprofit corporation called the Tricontinental something or another. I can't remember all the details, but Anyway, he's got a great article out on the costs of racism and colonialism. And I'm going to just bring you read you a couple of choice quotes from the article, and then invite you all to read the rest of it. It's there. We'll have it on our when we put up the video. We'll also put these links up, including this one. All links to all the articles that we mentioned. So, on the cost of racism and colonialism, he says, on July 13th, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted a landmark resolution on the prevalence of racism and for the creation of an independent mechanism made up of 3 experts to investigate the root cause of deeply embedded racism and intolerance. The group of African states pushed for this resolution, which had emerged out of global anger over the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police on May 25th, 2020. The discussions in the UNHRC considered the problems of police brutality and went back to the formation of our modern system in the crucible of slavery and colonialism. A number of Western countries, such as the United States and the United Kingdom, hesitated over both the assessment of the past and the question of reparations. These governments were able to remove the requirement to investigate systemic racism in the US law enforcement. Recognition of the enormity of the costs of enslavement and colonialism is a basic demand of the majority of the world's population. Calculation of those costs range from 777 trillion, with a T, trillion dollars for the hold on here just a sec, for the Atlantic slave trade, and 45 trillion for the British colonialism in India. These are partial but still formidable calculations. So the article goes on like this to into much greater detail on the costs of colonialism, and even into the legacy of colonialism and slavery to this very day. Seems to me like when you've stolen $777 trillion from the Black people in the Americas, the people that you brought over here and treated to centuries of slavery, that you owe them something, and reparations could never possibly make up for it all, but it's a start. So, Rainer, what are your thoughts?
Oh, well, I'm reading the sequel manga to the Avatar: The Last Airbender story, where they're trying to sort out the settler colonialism, how that can be reversed after the imperialism has been defeated, after they've shifted towards a new non-imperialist government, and it seems to be a complicated situation, a series of dilemmas that this post-colonial society has to sort out in order to make up for the damages that colonialism has wrought. And the reality, both in the Avatar universe and in our universe, is that the harms done by the system, by empire and colonialism, can never truly be fully rectified, because we're talking about genocide. We're talking about entire nations of people exterminated. The native population, all of that wealth stolen from the African nation, and of course there have also been a lot of people in the African nation killed off within the United States by police, by white terrorism, by this whole structure of colonial destruction. And you see parallels to that in Korea, where something like a fourth of the northern half of Korea's population was killed off in the Korean War.
A third.
A third, wow.
Yeah.
And
one out of every 3 people in that country were killed by the North American imperialists.
Yeah, they're never going to.
The whole country was destroyed.
Right. They're never going to get that, get all those dead people back. You can compare that to the permanent impacts of the Holocaust. That's not going to be undone. So all that we can materially do is dismantle the systems that are keeping the victims of colonialism down, and well, of course, not just dismantling that system, but working to compensate for the harms done. Last month, I revisited this organization called the African People's Socialist Party, and I donated to it because I remember seeing them presenting that donation option as a way to pay reparations, in a sense. So I encourage others to donate to the African People's Socialist Party.
Well, yeah, that's one good way. The African People's Socialist Party is a good organization and deserves your support. I don't know if it takes the place of reparations. Reparations has to go to a people, not to a party. But yeah, well, there you go. Anyway, next on the list, colonial genocide grows amid climate crisis and imperial decline.
This is written in response to the recent incident where these Texas Border Patrol agents were seen intimidating, to put it lightly, these Black people who were trying to come into this country, and the defenders of the Border Patrol agents claimed that they didn't actually use whips. These Democrats have been exaggerating by calling them whips. And sure, they weren't technically whips, but they were versions of horse reins that were clearly designed to function as whips. And it had really bad connotations. You at least have to admit that. And on a broader scale, these migrants were trying to come here directly because of U.S. policies towards Haiti. These were Haitian migrants. And even though Biden has condemned this practice of the horses and the whip-like reins. The Biden administration has been increasing prosecutions and deportations of these Haitian immigrants, and the Biden administration is obviously continuing the policies of enforced neoliberal poverty and intervention within Haiti. It's pretty obvious that the Biden administration had some role in the assassination of the president there, because the Colombian US proxies carried out the assassination. And this assassination was done with the intent of further destabilizing the country and installing a new, even more pro-US government within Haiti.
Yeah. That's quite a wild thing there. Biden is deporting even more people than Trump did. The Biden regime has more children locked up in cages, basically, than Trump had, even though the liberals were all upset when Trump was doing that. But we haven't heard a fucking peep from these same liberals when Biden does it. There's not a lot of difference between Biden and Trump once you get past the words. Once you get past the tone of the words, Biden is carrying out pretty much every major domestic and international policy, every imperial policy that Trump carried out, Biden is carrying out now, whether we go to China or Iran or Syria or Afghanistan, anywhere you go, it's the same. And of course, here in the United States, Biden's still supporting the killer cops over the people. So yeah, not a hell of a lot of difference. And colonial genocide and imperial decline continue. So next on the list, comparing the contours of Russia's Ummah-Pivot in Syria and Afghanistan. Now, this comes from an article that's, well, let me see here. Where is this article from? It's an article, oh yeah, from consortiumnews.com. It's from today, from the 29th of September. And anyway, yeah, what we have here is Russia's 21st century grand strategy. Or no, you know what? No, it's not from the Consortium News. It's from another publication, but it's by it's about Russia, comparing Russia's tactics or Russia's policy in Syria and Afghanistan. Russia's 21st century grand strategy can be described as its leadership's aspiration to make their country the supreme balancing force in Eurasia. To this end, it aims to have equally excellent relations with all the supercontinent's many parties through a creative combination of outreaches with a priority focus on expanding ties with the non-traditional partners. Russia cannot become disproportionately dependent on the East, China, for instance, or the West, the EU, for instance. Hence why it's recently taken to exploring previously untapped opportunities beyond its southern frontier in the majority Muslim countries that form part of the international Islamic community, which is referred to as Ummah. This policy can be described as Russia's Ummah-Pivot. Moscow's differing degrees of involvement in the two countries in recent years, Syria and Afghanistan, can be considered case studies of this policy. Both are mired in very complex conflicts and geostrategically positioned in their respective regions. Furthermore, Russia has been compelled by circumstances to pragmatically engage a wide array of majority Muslim countries, including traditional ones with which it hasn't worked closely before. After having compared and contrasted the Syrian and the Afghan conflicts in the context of Russia's Ummah-Pivot, it becomes clear that the Eurasian great power has truly become a force to be reckoned with in the international Muslim community. Its grand strategic goals are being advanced after Moscow ambitiously made itself an important stakeholder in those two regional conflicts, whose ultimate outcomes will powerfully shape the future of the supercontinent. This bolsters Russia's balancing act between the East and the West by providing the southern vector, by proving that the southern vector has indeed become a pivotal part of its policymaking calculus. It also shows the pragmatism of Russia's foreign policy in Ummah, which starkly contrasts with the US's approach there. And this article goes on with examples both from Afghanistan and from Syria about the contrasts, the comparisons, the similarities and differences between what Russia faces in these two countries and how it has wisely adapted the policy in each country to the circumstances that country faces. So what are your thoughts, Rainer?
I've heard that global warming is going to make Russia into potentially the biggest superpower throughout these coming decades, or pretty much the biggest superpower, since China is, of course, in the process of becoming the most influential country. And it's very good news that Russia is pursuing these ties building, these peaceful relationships with as many countries as that's possible to build in a world where the U.S. is gunning for you. Because in the coming decades, we're really going to need to shift beyond a paradigm of manufactured imperialist war. we're really going to need to cooperate as a species. And my big hope, as everyone like me has hoped for the last generation, is that Russia is going to become the Soviet Union 2.0 decades. That's all that we wish for.
Yeah. Yeah, that depends on quite a lot of different things, but when Vladimir Putin finally retires, we're going to see some big changes in Russia. I don't know that Russia is going to become that much more appealing or that much more powerful in the next 2 decades, let's say. I mean, global warming has not advanced that far yet to where to the type of situation that you're talking about. But given 3 or 4 decades from now, or 5, yes, we're going to see huge changes, mainly because as the globe warms, Russia becomes more appealing because Russia warms, where countries like the United States, for instance, a lot of which right now will become unbearably hot. Russia's very cold climate, 3 or 4 decades from now, will be very comfortable. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. But even before then, Russia is already advanced more than any other country in some categories. For instance, in advanced weapons systems, Russia's jets and defense systems and so forth are the most advanced in the world. No other country can compare with them already. And they're quite advanced in a number of different high-tech industries beyond just the weapons industry as well. So yeah, Russia and China make very good partners because they bring different strengths to the table. Next on the list, the U.S. empire's evils as described by its former servants. And this is the article that Rainer was talking about last week and promised us that he was going to deliver. And yes, I read it, and it was a superb article. Very well done, Rainer. Kudos on that.
Yeah, in this article, I mention you. I name you because last week you described how you knew William Bloom and said that William Bloom did a 180 on the topic of imperialism, on the topic of communism. I don't know if you actually became a communist, but he went from wanting to join.
I would say that he was a communist. I mean, I don't remember him ever mentioning what he was, but I would say just from his reading that I would say that he was a communist. But yeah, I mean, I knew him after all those changes took place. So I only knew the good Bill, not the bad Bill. Or not, I mean, I knew the good Bill, not the indifferent or the ignorant Bill. Put it that way.
Yeah. So you could say that he had a redemption arc like Prince Zuko from Avatar. So have all of these other figures I mention in this article. I quote their statements about imperialism, about the lies that are so ubiquitous within U.S. intelligence. I quote this interesting former U.S. Colonel, Lawrence Wilkerson, who in recent years has been making these statements regarding U.S. intelligence culture regarding U.S. intentions for Afghanistan. He's described how there's a natural bias within the U.S. intelligence community to basically to put out narratives that fit what the defense contractors want, that fit what the interests of U.S. imperialism want. So that's a low-key act of whistleblowing, as are the other statements that come from these figures. I quote John Perkins, the former economic hitman, as he calls himself, who worked for this awful firm in the 70s that he described would make deals with these countries, these poor countries, and to develop pro-corporate infrastructure projects so that the U.S. empire would profit, and so that the people in these countries would ultimately get poorer. What's another person that I quote? Oh yeah, Smedley Butler. He's a pretty infamous figure in a good way, who confessed to being a gangster for capitalism, a gangster for business, who helped facilitate all these atrocities, all for the sake of profit. And the kinds of things that these people talk about in these quotes in my article are pretty obvious to most people. Most people intuitively know that war is a racket. That's why most Americans generally oppose the idea of imperialist warfare. But it's good to have this kind of confirmation right from the source, right from people who have been involved in this evil system and have then sought out to expose the truth about the system.
Yes, it really is. It really is. It was an impactful article. I hope that a lot of people get a chance to read it. We'll have it up once again, the link to it when we put this video up, so people can read it now if you haven't already read it. Yeah, very good article. Smedley Butler, he had a way. I don't know if it was just the language of the 1930s, but he really had a way with describing what he had done before. I worked as a gangster for U.S. imperialism. I mean, I was part of the racket called war. He really did a great job. After having spent a lot of time himself being in all that, with describing the horrible situation that U.S. imperialism imposed on the rest of the world back then in the 19-teens and 20s and 30s. And now it hasn't changed at all, as we can see by somebody like John Perkins and his experiences, and he talks about much more current situations where the United States did the most horrible war crimes, murder, assassination, ruining entire countries. Yeah, very, very good article. Okay, next on the list, Chinese white paper on the economy. Now, this is a white paper that just came out today, the 29th, is Wednesday. This episode of the show will actually air tomorrow, the 30th, so it'll be published the 30th. But the Chinese white paper came out today, and in it, the Chinese government, through their publishing arm, takes a look at the Chinese economy from prior to 1949, October 1949, when the PRC, the People's Democratic China, first declared itself as a nation, and even prior to that, and it takes the situation of that time in depth. This is almost like a small book. It's like 70 pages long, and you can get it. We'll put a link up for it, but you can get it and read it. And it's the history of the Chinese economy from back then, when China was one of the poorest countries in the world, perhaps the poorest country in the world, at least the poorest large or major country in the world, to now, when it is on the very cusp, on the precipice of becoming the largest economy in the world. In the next 5-6 years, we're going to see it, if it hasn't already happened. I mean, we haven't seen the figures for 2021, but it may have already happened, that it becomes the largest economy in the world. Now, because China is 3 to 4 times larger in population than the United States, China has a ways to go to reach parity with the United States when it comes to the actual standard of living of each individual in China. It's got a ways to go in that. It probably won't reach that until close to 2050. But it has raised 700 to 800 million people up out of poverty since 1949, when they began. And that, no other country has ever done that. I was reading something yesterday where someone, one of the leaders of another country, was talking about China's anti-poverty program, and saying that this is literally phenomenal. There's never, ever been another country in the history of humankind that raised so many people out of poverty up into a working class existence than China has since 1949. So this white paper is, I think, a pretty important thing, and we'll have the link up for people to get it.
I just started thinking again about Steven Pinker, because Steven Pinker is one of those feel-good pro-capitalist intellectuals who has pointed to the relative fall in poverty in recent decades as evidence that the system is fundamentally improving, that the current socioeconomic order is basically good. But this is always misleading when people like him or like Bill Gates point to these poverty statistics as supposed evidence of capitalism's superiority, because pretty much the entire source of this reduction in poverty, aside from Vietnam, is China. China's massive reduction in poverty is what's offset the incredible increase in poverty that's taken place throughout pretty much the rest of the world due to capitalism. This reduction in poverty has not happened because of capitalism, but in spite of it. It's happened because socialism with Chinese characteristics has been able to utilize markets in ways that capitalism, that a capitalist state could never utilize them. I'm thinking also of who is Fareed Zakaria, who wrote in his book, The Post-American World, that when he talks to economists and policymakers from places like India, capitalist countries like India, on how they aim to address the poverty problem, they tend to go into these long-winded, convoluted explanations about like trying to maneuver social welfare, economic growth, all this BS that's clearly not going to work, and it's not worked. But when he talks to the equivalent figures from within China about how to reduce poverty, they're very able to very easily and seemingly relatively concisely point to how they can utilize markets to reduce poverty, and they've delivered. That's the difference between China's system and the neoliberal hell that we live in. The neoliberal capitalism makes everything difficult, everything dysfunctional, whereas China's system makes all these crises, whether they're poverty or the pandemic or global warming, pollution, so much more manageable.
Yeah. That's the funny thing about those figures, the world figures for poverty. When you actually take a look at it, all of the poverty reduction has taken place in China, Vietnam, and Laos. That's it.
All Laos.
Laos, yeah, Laos.
We so often forget about it.
Yeah, those three countries. I mean, Laos and Vietnam are much smaller than China, so you know, the actual numbers are far less, but the per capita numbers are pretty are close. Although the Lao and Viet people got started on this process a couple of decades after the Chinese did, so that makes a difference too. But the poverty in the capitalist world has actually increased over this period of time, not decreased, increased. There's more poverty now, per capita, more poverty than there was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So, yeah. Anyway, next on the list, COVID-19 foreshadows the horrors of capitalist geoengineering.
I'm sure you've seen the movie Snowpiercer. It depicts a scenario where these imperialist governments and these corporate leaders decide to deal with global warming as a supposed quick fix by spraying CW7, this fictional chemical, into the atmosphere to cool the planet down. It ends up creating an ice age that kills almost all life. The polar bears still survive. And this is the kind of, obviously that's a pretty extreme, implausible scenario. That is not going to play out exactly like that, but a lot of damage could be done by the kinds of climate solutions that the billionaires are cooking up. Apparently, Bill Gates wants to whiten the atmosphere to deflect sun rays. And that could have a lot of unforeseen consequences, whether for weather patterns, for crop yields, and it's not like we as a species, like as a collective, want to permanently remake the very color of the sky as a band-aid for our own inability to get ourselves together in fixing this carbon emissions problem. It would be so much simpler, so much less costly, like not just economically or environmentally, but spiritually, to simply reduce emissions by defeating capitalism than go for these kinds of haphazard, ambiguously effective solutions that the billionaires are trying to cook up.
Yes, absolutely. You're tampering. We're tampering with fire, no matter what, with fire or ice, no matter what. I mean, people forget, or people don't know, that we are in an ice age. There are glacial caps on the North Pole and South Pole. That means we're in an ice age. We're in what's called a interglacial period of this current ice age. That means that we are in a temporary warming period. Plus, over the last couple hundred years, we've added a tremendous amount, more than in the history of humankind, a tremendous amount of CO2, methane, and other heat trapping gases, which is warming the planet a lot more than the planet would otherwise be warming. So then you have someone like Bill Gates come along and say, "Oh, let's cool it down with by whitening everything up." Well, yeah, I mean, you're very likely in those circumstances. I don't think it's implausible at all. You're very likely to tip us into the next glacial period by doing that. I don't think it's implausible at all that something like that could happen. So,
well, there's a difference between the glacial period and the crazy Snowpiercer scenario where almost all, where like all 7 billion humans die.
Yeah, that's true. That's a runaway glacial period, what they're talking about. More like a more likely scenario, which has happened. I mean, the overall ice age that we're in right now has lasted for more than 3 million years. And prior to that, there was a period of about 12, 15 million years where there were no ice caps on the North Pole or South Pole. So over this 3 million year period, we've gone through about 20 interglacial periods. Short periods, because interglacials are usually short. They're usually 10 to 15,000 years long. And this one that we're in right now is already more than 13,000 years old. So we've been in this interglacial period for 13,000 years. But you have 20 interglacial periods in this 3 million year period, and then a number, 20 or so much longer glacial periods within the ice age. The glacial periods typically last nowadays about 100,000 years. So this situation that we're in, when we do finally go back into the glacial period, it could be next year, or it could be 2 or 3 or 4,000 years from now. But when we do go into the next glacial period, we're going to see glaciers coming down. Well, even in the mountains of Arizona, you'll see glaciers. But in the valleys of Arizona will be moderate still. But the mountains would have glaciers even here. So the glaciers will reach very far south. What it really means, it doesn't mean like in Snowpiercer that you're going to end up with no people. What it means is you're going to end up with 7 or 8 or 9 billion people crammed into a space, you know, that's from Arizona south and from, you know, like Venezuela and Colombia north. That's the space you'll have for people, and the rest of the world will be glacier. So, yeah, but you know, right now we know so little about the mechanisms. We do know some of the mechanisms, but we know so little about it. And there might be lots more involved than what we know, that we'd be better off for the time being not doing anything other than curbing human activity when it comes to production of greenhouse gases. And, you know, I mean, the way to do that is by going over to other sources of power and by conserving. Because right now, a lot of, especially under capitalism, a lot of global warming comes from capitalism. Basically, comes from the industrial processes that capitalism does. And we can live just as good, just as nice lives without capitalism and without a lot of the wastage that capitalism brings with it. We should do a story sometime soon, just you know, whether we've got an article to go by or whether we just make our own, you know, write our own article or whatever. We should go, we should do a show about the wastage of capitalism, because it is enormous. Just the wastage of capitalism. Just that alone, socialism will save 20-30% of all activity that causes pollution, just by not having capitalism. Yeah, so next on the list, where are we at now? COVID foreshadows horrors of capital's geoengineering. Oh, here we go, the final story, and this one will be short. It's the top Cuban diplomat speaks to the Grayzone about the renewed assault. That is the American empire's renewed assault on Cuba. The Grayzone's video show Redlines, the host, Anya Perempil, speaks with Carlos F. DiCasio, the Director General of the to the United States for Cuba's foreign ministry, about continuing U.S. attempts to overthrow his country's government. Perempil asks, President Miguel Diaz-Canel just gave an address before the UN General Assembly in which he denounced what he described as the U.S. attempt to reinstate a Monroe Doctrine policy. This was a policy explicitly articulated by Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, when he famously declared, "The Monroe Doctrine is back." Yes, yet is Biden actually continuing this policy? This fascinating discussion is on a video, and we'll post the link to the video here. This fascinating discussion is focused on the expanded and ramped up attacks on Cuba by the United States since the beginning of the Biden regime. And Director General to the United States for Cuba and Cuba's foreign ministry, or for Cuba's foreign ministry, Carlos F. DiCasio, is really an interesting guy and has a lot to say about this in this video. So I urge all of you to look at the video if you haven't already seen it. We're going to put the link up. So just look under this video and find it. There you go.
Yeah, I've been focusing a lot on Latin America, or really just as much as I focused on Eurasia, Africa, all these other places where the U.S. is intervening. And as for Cuba, you know, as I've said, we always need to be careful about being too optimistic when it comes to the survival of actually existing socialism, since the U.S. did succeed at taking down socialism within the entire Soviet bloc. And I've seen U.S. communists accuse Cuba of engaging in the same kind of revisionism that the Soviet leadership did, that led to the Soviet Union's downfall, to the successful imperialist coup there. But this is a misleading charge, because in this last year or so, Cuba has had to make certain business reforms, like open up its economy a little bit more, out of necessity, out of the desperation that the economic crisis and the sanctions have placed upon it. So the last thing we need is bad faith criticisms of Cuba's socialist model in the midst of the siege.
Yeah, it's quite a different situation. Cuba's Communist Party is one of the best in the world, and it is not the Soviet Union of Gorbachev. That's for damn sure. And the kinds of policies, I mean, Cuba has run a policy very similar in many ways to the policy that China has run since 1978. Cuba has run the same kind of policy since the early 1990s. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that they were very dependent to the tune of $20 billion a year on the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union came to an end at the end of 1991, they had to figure out a few things. And one of the things that they figured out is that they were going to need a new model of socialism. They were going to need a Leninist model of socialism, an NEP model of socialism, same as China. So in that, you know, they came up with a socialist market system. You know, I've seen this just recently, just yesterday, I think, someone talking about how market systems aren't only capitalist. You know, there have been market systems in every single different kind of economic system for the last 15,000 fucking years. What makes, you know, why does capitalism think that the market is so particular to itself when it's not? Capitalism's been around at least as a ruling kind of a grouping for a little more than 300 years. It's been around as a powerful part of the economy for 500-600 years. And over that period of time, they had a market, but so did everybody else. So did every feudal country that ever existed. So did every ancient slave economy that ever existed. So, it's just absurd. And the idiots who call themselves socialists, who think that market system equals capitalism and no market system equals socialism, they're just wrong. It's not the way it works. Socialist market systems have been with us from the very beginning. For the first 10 years of the Soviet Union, except for a short period during the Civil War, they had the NEP, the first socialist market system. And their economy did quite well. As a matter of fact, their economy did far better than the current Chinese economy. I mean, they had growth rates of 16, 17, 18% per annum under the Lenin's NEP. So, it's ridiculous. The whole idea that you need that any market system is capitalist. It's just absurd, and it shows the incredibly dull level of education that these people have, that they say such a thing, because it's just not true. They haven't studied the economic systems over the last 15,000 years as I have. And if they had, they would know that every type of economy, including socialism, has had market systems. Okay, that's it for us tonight. Had a wonderful discussion with you, Rainer, tonight. As always, you did a yeoman's job of bringing lots of great information to the people. Want to thank all of you out there who tuned in, and invite you back next week. Tune in again, where we'll have another episode of Revolutionary Socialist Review with Chris Driscoll and Rainer Shea. Until then, I bid you a sweet adieu.